Imagine you're inside a white room. There are no windows, just bright white artificial light 24 hours a day. You wear white clothes. You eat white rice off a white plate. The guards never speak to you, and they wear slippers that hide their footsteps. There's no color, no sound, just nothingness. How long would you last? White room torture is one of the most bizarre, disturbing torture methods out there. Victims are rumored to lose their sense of time and reality and experience these crazy hallucinations. But you might be wondering at this point, how does a simple white room do all of this? So we first learned about white room torture in the early 2000s. Iranian writer and activist Amir Fakhrova spoke out about his time in the notorious Evin prison in Tehran. At one stage in his prison sentence, he was stripped and forced to change into white clothes and then taken to a windowless white cell, which was constantly illuminated by this piercing white light. He only ate white rice off white plates, and no one ever spoke to him, and Amir remained there for 8 months. He described the room as the worst place in the world, a place where your nightmares go to have nightmares. Nothing can prepare you for the full horror of it. And white room torture isn't limited to Iran. There's also a facility called La Tumba, or the Tomb, in Venezuela, and it's underground beneath the headquarters of Venezuelan intelligence services. Apparently, there are rooms with all white walls where prisoners are held captive. They're deprived of all human contact and they lose sense of time because these cells are constantly brightly lit. It's so bizarre, it makes you just wonder who would come up with such a thing. So white room torture has its roots in Canada and the US in the 1950s. Around this time, psychologists were looking into sensory deprivation and the effects on the human mind. We humans are constantly surrounded by different colors, shapes, textures, tastes, sounds, etc. And we're always processing new stimuli. Some psychologists wondered what happens when we take all of this away. And Canadian and American intelligence were also interested. What might happen to their soldiers who were captured by enemy forces? What hell might they be put through to break them down? And how could the Canadians and Americans use this torture to their own advantage? One of the pioneers in this field was Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb. He created the now infamous sensory deprivation room. It was a windowless cubicle which stayed lit 24 hours a day, and people would lie on this bed and they'd be wearing a plastic visor which limited the amount that they could see. And they were also wearing gloves and cardboard tubes around their arms to limit the sensation of touch. They were wearing headphones, and there was also constant white noise blasting, so they couldn't make out any sounds. The experiment was intended to go on for weeks, which sounds like a lot to me. Like, there's no amount you could pay me to do that. And yeah, most people broke down after about 48 hours, and no one lasted more than a week. The participants started to hallucinate, initially just little dots and patterns, and then these visions started to get more complex and sometimes a bit disturbing. For example, someone saw these rows of like little yellow men with their mouths just hanging open, and another one felt like there was someone lying in the bed with them. The participants also found themselves becoming paranoid, and they were unable to think clearly, and they started to just lose their grip on reality. And when they couldn't take it anymore and they left the experiment, they found it hard to shake off this altered sense of reality. Their perception was off. For example, they thought that the whole room was moving around them, or they saw that objects were constantly changing shape and size. So psychologists think that when we're deprived of external stimuli, our brain kind of amps up its internal activity, so it can fill the void with things like heightened emotions and paranoid and delusional thinking and hallucinations. And another controversial area of research at the time was social isolation. One of the pioneers of this field was American psychologist Harry Harlow. He famously studied rhesus monkeys. He placed baby monkeys in what he called the pit of despair, which was a chamber that completely isolated them from other monkeys. And very soon after they were in there, they started to exhibit really disturbed behavior. For example, just staring blankly, or circling around in the cage, or harming themselves. And when they were reintroduced to the other monkeys, they didn't know how to interact. These experiments showed that social isolation can have serious psychological impacts which last beyond the period of isolation. After the 50s and 60s, research into sensory deprivation and social isolation was deemed too unethical. Other academics and the public just thought it was unacceptable to put humans and other animals through these kinds of experiments. But there was enough knowledge from these early experiments to form the foundation for white room torture. By this point, you can probably see how torture doesn't need to break bones or draw blood. The worst torture breaks minds. Anyways, don't forget to subscribe for more weird and wacky science content, and let me know what you'd like to see next.